Hello, welcome back to another breaking news update. My name is Jimmy Boyd, and you were watching Boyd News. I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. I've got some major breaking news coming out from Ukraine to share with you. So, we've had so many reports coming out this morning saying that Ukraine is set to receive permission for long range strikes inside of Russia. These are using ATACMS missiles, British Storm Shadow missiles, French Scout missiles. We've been discussing this for a very long time now, and it looks like the time has come. And I'm hearing that by this Friday, we could potentially be hearing that Ukraine now has permission to strike inside of Russian territory using all these missiles that are being given to them by the West. They also now have the F-16 fighter jets, so they could be potentially deploying some of these missiles on their jets as well. And we also talked to you guys recently about the JASSM missiles. I think it was the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missiles that the U.S. was considering giving to Ukraine for the F-16s. These are long-range capability missiles too, as far as I'm concerned, and they could be using these on their F-16 jets. So this is absolutely huge. I want to dive deeper in this today and talk about this, as this is obviously a very big topic, and it looks like we're going to be seeing this happen this week. I'm very convinced that by Friday we will probably be hearing this. So let's go ahead and move into the news here. I want to show you this from Ukrainska Pravda. Biden does not reject permission for Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, says U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So Antony Blinken coming out and stating this recently, that Joe Biden does not reject the permission for Ukraine, okay? So that means that he's for it, okay? So this is a big step right here. If Joe Biden gives the okay for Ukraine to strike inside of Russia, that's basically going to allow all the other allies to follow suit. And we are going to see them all collectively allow Ukraine to strike inside of Russia. So that was pretty big news right there. So let's go ahead and move to another article here that I have pulled up for you also. Now, I showed this to you guys this morning in our update video with the Ukraine war. We talked about Moscow coming under attack by Ukrainian drones just last night. And we talked about this a little bit too. This is from the New Voice of Ukraine. Blinken to announce permission for ATACMS strikes into Russia, Congressman Mccaul said. Okay, this was dated today, September 10th, 2024. It says here, during his upcoming visit to Kyiv, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will announce that Washington no longer prohibits Ukraine from using ATACMS missiles to attack Russian territory. Axios reported on September 10th. The shift in U.S. policy was reported by Axios Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke, citing Michael Mccaul, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I spoke with Blinken 2 days ago. He is going with his UK counterpart to Kyiv to essentially tell them that they will allow strikes on Russia with ATACMS. Brufke quoted Mccaul in a Twitter post. Earlier it was reported that UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Blinken plan to visit Kyiv this week. This will be the first such joint visit in over 10 years. Blinken also stated that on September 13th, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. According to Blinken, they may discuss granting permission for the Ukrainian armed forces to carry out strikes deep into Russia. Okay, so look at what's going on here. We have the UK Prime Minister heading over to the U.S. to meet with Joe Biden at the White House, and they're going to discuss granting permission. Most likely they will. And then understand this, we've got U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, along with the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, going to Kyiv this week as well. Now, from what's being reported here, is that this is going to be their first such joint visit in over 10 years. So it's going to be the first time that the UK and the U.S. has actually done this in Kyiv in 10 years. And at the same time, what we're hearing is we're going to have U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announce in Kyiv that Ukraine can now strike inside of Russian territory and all restrictions have been lifted. So I'm telling you guys, this is coming. It definitely seems like it to me. I'm extremely convinced right now that we're going to see this happen. And it definitely makes me wonder what the reaction is going to be from Russia, how they're going to respond to this. And that's obviously the big question, right? It could go a very negative way, or we may not see any reaction from Russia at all. But either way, we're going to see escalation in this war, and this all began right when we heard that Iran was sending ballistic missiles to Russia. Okay, they came out and said that there would be a swift and severe response. The U.S. came out and said that, along with NATO allies. We already see lots of sanctions being put on Iran right now. Iran is even being cut off from UK flights. The UK is cutting off like major airlines with them, so Iranians won't even be able to travel back and forth from there to Europe. It's going to be a major damage to their economy, most likely. They're going to have to find ways to get around that. So lots of sanctions being put on Iran. And then at the same time, now we're seeing major escalation over here in the Ukraine war. And all of a sudden, what many people thought was the unthinkable, the U.S. allowing Ukraine to strike inside of Russian territory using U.S.-made ATACMS or British Storm Shadow, anything like that. Now we're seeing that as a possible thing that's coming this week. So let me show you a couple other things as well here on X. Going underground reports, U.S. Secretary of State Butcher Blinken won't rule out Ukraine hitting Russia with U.S.-supplied long-range missiles. Antony Blinken said Ukraine would be allowed to use the missiles if the weapons could advance what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve. This will do nothing to improve Ukraine's dire battlefield situation, which continues to worsen despite every escalation in the power of the Western weapons supplied by NATO, but it will encourage Russia to continue hitting Ukraine harder and harder to force Ukraine to the negotiating table quicker. So clearly he's talking a lot on behalf of Russia here, and he mentions Abrams tanks were supposed to be a game changer, nothing changed. HIMARS were supposed to be a game changer, nothing changed. ATACMS were supposed to be a game changer, nothing changed. F-35s, I think he meant F-16s, were supposed to be a game changer, nothing changed. The inevitable of negotiations to end the war gets pointlessly delayed, with Ukraine in a worse negotiating position as each day passes. So, obviously, many of the things that we thought were going to be game-changing, I have to agree with that in some ways. They definitely weren't game-changing for the most part. But when it comes to these long-range strikes inside of Russia, I don't want to say it'll necessarily be game-changing. I mean, we never really know. I guess can't say that fully. But we definitely think it will bring about a major response from Russia. At least that's what I think will happen. Russia will either respond heavily here, maybe start pounding Ukraine even more, or is this really the major red line that draws it into a potential nuclear conflict? I don't know. It's really hard to tell what's going to happen, but we'll talk about that some more as we move on. But this is a 44-second clip of Antony Blinken basically coming out in an interview here in the last 24 hours stating that the U.S. will not rule out long-range strikes inside of Ukraine, and hinting also that they're going to rule in and allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia. Take a look.
Should they have this weapon system or that weapon system? There are a lot of things that go into it. Do they know how to use it? And some of these sophisticated systems take training, and that's one of the other things we've done. Can they maintain it? Because if you give them something that falls apart in 7 days because it can't be maintained, that doesn't do a lot of good. And then, is it part of a coherent strategy to achieve a very clear objective? All of those things have to go into these decisions, but what I can tell you is we've adapted and adjusted every step along the way. We'll continue to do that.
So not ruling out at this stage?
We never rule out, but when we rule in, we want to make sure it's done in such a way that it can advance what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve. Not simply saying...
Okay, so did you see that, what he said there? He said that they would not rule out, but when they rule in, they want to make sure that is going to be a good strategy for Ukraine to achieve their victory or whatever their goals are, right? So that shows right there as well that Ukraine is going to get these permissions lifted here very soon. And if it's not going to be soon, he's also noting here that it will happen at some point eventually. So it definitely looks like this is going to happen at some point in the coming future, but it definitely looks like it's going to be happening this week, ladies and gentlemen. So let me show you one more thing here also from X. So let's hop on over here to ViceGrad24. It says, breaking, Blinken hints that he and his UK counterpart David Lammy will travel to Kyiv in a first step for Ukraine to receive permission for long-range strikes against Russia with US ATACMS and British Storm Shadows. So I showed you guys a clip of this morning, but it was only about 45 seconds. I got a longer clip that actually has him talking about the fact that they're planning to head to Kyiv this week, and they're going to be supporting them, hearing them out, what are their concerns in terms of long-range strikes, and then he mentions, pay attention, he'll say in this video that they're going to look and see what they can do to help, okay? And that's possibly indicating that they're going to lift these restrictions also, so take a look.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, you've announced new sanctions today. We've had a lot of sanctions, and the war grinds on for, as you say, into a third winter. What the Ukrainians have said they want, and reportedly, or British allies have also said this privately, is the freedom to use the long-range missiles that you're supplying them to do what they're designed to do, which is to hit targets deep in Russia, to hit the source of those glide bombs, and possibly the new missiles you're saying that supply of ballistic missiles could allow the Russians to now use. Has that time now come? And if not, why not? And what are you afraid of?
Right. So I think a hallmark from day one of our efforts to support Ukraine against this aggression is to work to make sure that they have what they need when they need it to be most effective in dealing with the Russian aggression. And I think that you've seen, again, from day one, that we have continuously adjusted and adapted based on battlefield conditions, based on what Russia was doing in a given place and by given means. And that's been a through line in everything that we've done. I've said this many times before, so my own colleagues may be tired of hearing me say it, but it's so important as we're making these decisions that we factor in a number of critical elements. It's not just the system itself that counts. You have to ask, can the Ukrainians effectively use it? And sometimes that requires significant training, which we've done. Do they have the ability to maintain it? Again, this is something that we've worked on. And then, is it part of an effective strategy? All of these are questions we're continuously asking ourselves. Secretary Austin, Secretary of Defense, his British counterpart, and others who just gathered on the defense side are constantly working these issues. Now, one of the purposes of the trip that we'll be taking together is to hear directly from the Ukrainian leadership, including Prime Minister Zelensky, about exactly, President Zelensky, excuse me, about exactly how the Ukrainians see their needs in this moment, toward what objectives, and what we can do to support those needs. So all I can tell you is we'll be listening intently to our Ukrainian partners. We'll both be reporting back to the Prime Minister, to President Biden in the coming days, and I fully anticipate this is something they'll take up when they meet on Friday.
Okay, so if you heard there, towards the end, he mentioned that they were going to hear out what the needs were for the Ukrainians, and then also they were going to see what they can do. Okay, what can they offer? All they can really do at the end of the day is just lift the restrictions, right? He mentioned that there's training that is needed to make sure that they can maintain the equipment that they're going to be using. Because you got to think about this too. Once this starts, this is going to set off a major chain of events, and we're going to see major escalation from this war, much worse than we ever saw before. We're going to see heavy strikes from Russia. Russia's going to go into panic mode. Imagine if these missiles start striking cities or whatever they're going to be going after. I mean, we already heard from Zelensky, President Zelensky from Ukraine, that right now his main objective is to force Russia into negotiating with Ukraine. Okay, so we already heard from Sergei Shoigu, the former defense minister. I showed you guys a video this morning, him coming out and saying that they are not going to negotiate with Ukraine, okay, until Ukraine pulls out of the Kursk region. Well, guess what? They're not going to pull out of the Kursk region. So because they're going to stay in there, they got to do whatever they can to force Russia into negotiating with them anyway. Okay, so in order to do that, Ukraine wants to put pressure on Vladimir Putin by striking airfields, taking out their bomber planes, their Su-34s, whatever, and then also potentially striking even cities like Moscow, maybe Rostov-on-Don, Voronezh, like major cities, putting pressure on the population too, so that way they can pressure Vladimir Putin into ending this war as well. So I think there's a number of objectives here that Ukraine is trying to achieve, but at the end of the day, what we're going to see is major escalation after this happens. It all started with these reports of Iran sending these ballistic missiles over to Russia. Whether they actually did that or not, we don't know for sure until we start to see these missiles flying into Ukraine. But the U.S. has already come out and said that the Russians already have these systems, these short-range ballistic missile systems, and they're probably going to be using them in the coming weeks. So this is why we're seeing this escalation coming from the U.S. now. And this is very dangerous, okay? This is probably the breaking point in this war of whether things are going to escalate and fly off the rails or if they're going to come to an end, okay? And I think we could see both. I think it's very possible. So just stay on your tippy toes, ladies and gentlemen, and just be prepared for anything to come from this war. And I have been saying this ever since I first started reporting on this channel back in January, that the real war going over here is the Ukraine war. Okay, that's the real war happening right now. This is the West versus the East right now over here. And it's not so much about what's happening with Israel. I think Israel is more just a separate conflict from this. May have some connections in some ways, but for the most part, this is the major war for basically for world dominance is how it's looked at. So it's obviously very dangerous. Okay, so just watch out for anything to happen. Highly recommend you just stay prepared with as many supplies you can get just in case something happens from this. We never know how Russia's going to respond, because that's the big question here next. Is Russia going to respond crazy here? Are they gonna throw some major response back at the West, or at least Ukraine? Who knows? But let me know what you think is going to happen down below. I'm curious to know what you're all thinking about. What are you worried about? What are you concerned about? Share your thoughts, concerns, and opinions down in the comment section. That's going to be it for this update. If you got something out of this, please smash that like button. Also, if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing down below. Hit the notification bell. That way YouTube can notify you. With that, hope you all have a great day. Everybody take care and God bless, and we'll see you in the next one.